What is up guys, under Kira, and now I'm back with a special audio video for you today. As the title says, ranking WrestleMania shows. So WrestleMania 39 is just 5 weeks away. So I thought, what videos can I do for WrestleMania season, because I've kind of done everything I want to do. And I just thought, okay, well, what about a revisit ranking WrestleMania list, because I did a list like this years ago. And then I thought, should I do it in a slide form? Or would it be better if I actually talked about the WrestleManias and give you like reasons and opinions for having these ranked where they are, sort of thing. So I thought that one would be a little bit better. So what we're going to do, we're going to look at every single WrestleMania show, rank them from worst to best. Easy as that. And I'll just have a little brief overview of the show. I'm not going to go into too much detail because I've detailed every WrestleMania. This will be a several hour long video. And just so you know guys, for the last few years I'm counting WrestleMania Night 1 and Night 2 as separate events. So WrestleMania 38 Night 1 and WrestleMania 38 Night 2 will be on two separate ranking lists. So even though there's been 38 WrestleManias overall, there's been 41 unique shows. So we're going to go from 41 all the way to number 1. So let's get into it. Coming in number 41, bottom of the barrel, the worst WrestleMania of all time has to be WrestleMania 11. Yeah, for me, this is always going to be the worst WrestleMania of all time. It was just a bad time in the business, to be honest. Like 1995 WWF, you just think of bad. The WrestleMania card, like at least other WrestleManias had something about them that made them like look and feel like a WrestleMania. This just felt like a normal show. So there are some positives on this show, not many, but there's a couple. I mean, Diesel versus Shawn Michaels for the WWF title was a very good title match. Not one of the better WrestleMania title matches of all time, but good title match nonetheless. Then also, I think Razor Ramon and Jeff Jarrett had a pretty good Intercontinental title match. Again, nothing really worth shouting about, but a good match. But the negatives, I mean, Bam Bam Bigelow LT main event was just It just didn't feel like a WrestleMania main event. I mean, I just wasn't that invested in LT. And I think this match has actually aged quite badly over the years. Because of what we've seen over the last few years of celebrity performances. I mean, Bad Bunny a couple of years ago. What Logan Paul's done as a celebrity. Because I think at the time, in a few years after this, I think people just settled for first time celebrities not to be terrible. So LT had a perfectly decent performance, especially because it was his one and only match. But it wasn't a great performance, because I think we've seen now what celebrities can do with Bad Bunny, Logan Paul and people like that. So I think expectations of celebrities have definitely improved over the years. But yeah, and then also when Bret Hart and Bob Backlund had a pretty poor I Quit match. When Bret Hart has a poor match, you know you've done something wrong. Undertaker versus King Kong Bundy, not the worst streak match of all time, but definitely in the low tier. I mean, Yokozuna and Owen Hart versus Smoking Guns was a decent match, I guess. But then you also had a pretty crappy opener for Allied Powers versus Jacob and Eli Blue. So with all that, WrestleMania 11 takes last spot. Coming in number 40, WrestleMania 2. I just don't like this show. I mean, you can look at some of these old WrestleManias and they don't age too well. But WrestleMania 1 will always be special because it was the first WrestleMania. And WrestleMania 3 was kind of the big WrestleMania that was kind of the template for what WrestleMania eventually became. So sandwiching those two WrestleManias is WrestleMania 2. And yeah, this is a bad show. I mean, the 3 locations thing just didn't really work out too well. There was too many just matches that didn't mean anything at all. I mean, you had the Bulldogs versus the Dream Team. That was the best match on the show for what it's worth. And that's actually a pretty decent tag match. JYD and Tito Santana versus the Funks. That's also a pretty good match. Steamboat versus Hercules is pretty decent as well. You do have 3 big main event matches that are all alright. I mean, Hogan versus Bundy isn't the worst WrestleMania main event of all time, but certainly not one of the best ones either. It was just kind of an okay match. steel cage match. Roddy Piper versus Mr. T was okay for novelty, I guess. A boxing match. The Battle Royal was fine, but then the undercards, like some of the matches on this shows were terrible. I mean, Randy Savage and George Steele for the Intercontinental title, probably maybe the worst Randy Savage WWF pay-per-view match of all time. That just wasn't very good. I mean, Don Morocco versus Paul Orndorff was a really mediocre opener. Jake the Snake versus George Wells was pretty crap. Fabulous Moolah versus Velvet McIntyre, that was also pretty crap. The flag match between Nikolai Volkov and Corbel Kirshner was not very good. And the Uncle Elmer versus Adrian Adonis, another bad match. So overall, just a really poor show. Now coming in at 39, WrestleMania 15. Sometimes I think, if not for the main event, this would have been the worst WrestleMania of all time. And it just shows not everything in the Attitude Era is great. And during the height of WWF's popularity in 1999, we put out a pretty terrible show. I just think the booking of this show was just so like over the top and terrible. So obviously the main event pretty much saves this show, doesn't it? Stone Cold versus The Rock round 1. This is a genuinely great main event, and honestly, if not for that main event, this probably would have been the worst WrestleMania ever. The only other positive I could really think of is the X-Pac versus Shane McMahon match. Now this certainly wasn't a blowaway match or anything like that. It was quite early in Shane's career, but it was actually a pretty good match. But honestly, like, yeah, so you had Triple H versus Kane. Now he's a one face, so earlier in the night, Triple H, Kane, China turns babyface, goes back to DX, only for an hour later, both Triple H and China to turn on DX and go to the corporation. So China's literally turned twice in the same show. Then you had the whole mess around the main event of Big Show and Mankind battling to become the special guest referee. Mankind wins by disqualification, but Paul White, the Big Show, destroys Mankind, puts him in the hospital. And then in the first babyface turn, the Big Show, Paul White knocks Vince McMahon out and then gets arrested. And then Vince decides to become the referee. Then after all, Shawn Michaels comes out and says, hang on, no. So after weeks of all this shit going down, Shawn Michaels then just decides, oh no, he's a commissioner. He's going to appoint the referee. They would just get a normal referee. And then we had two pretty forgettable title matches. First, Billy Gunn versus Al Snow versus Hardcore Holly for the Hardcore title. And then Road Dogg defend the Intercontinental title against Val Venis, Ken Shamrock and Goldust. Then you had the the worst Hell in a Cell match of all time. Yes, that is right. Worse than The Fiend versus Seth Rollins and The Undertaker versus the Big Boss Man. Just a really bad match, and the finished. The post match was just terrible, with the Ministry hanging the Big Boss Man from the Hell in a Cell. That was just awful. Absolutely ridiculous. Then the famous Brawl for All, where Butterbean and Bart Gunn had a legit boxing match, which, you know, putting Brawl for All in a Bart Gunn, you know, a guy who's tough in the sense he can beat up other wrestlers, against a professional boxer like bloody Butterbean. What do you think was going to happen? Yeah, exactly what did happen. Butterbean knocking Bart Gunn the fuck out in the first round. Yeah. And then what else? It was Sable versus Tori. That was another bad match. So bad match, poor booking, made this a terrible WrestleMania. Coming number at 38, WrestleMania 9. I think a lot of people have this as the worst WrestleMania of all time, and I agree it's a bad WrestleMania. It's in the lower tier, but it's not the worst WrestleMania of all time. My first WrestleMania. I mean, I do like the look of this show, the whole toga theme and all that, just because of the visual look of it and all. It actually did look and feel like a WrestleMania. It's just a lot of the matches weren't very good, and the show just wasn't booked particularly well. I mean, it actually started off really good. I mean, the first two matches are actually really good. I mean, you got Shawn Michaels versus Tatanka for the Intercontinental title. That's the best match in the show. I mean, it's certainly not the best Shawn Michaels WrestleMania match you're going to see out there. I mean, Shawn Michaels went on to have much bigger and much better WrestleMania matches down the line. Then the Steiners versus the Head Shrinkers as well. That was actually a really good, hard-hitting tag team match. A really good match. In the main event sort of the main event, which Bret and Yokozuna, that was a good match, not a great one. But then that led to maybe the worst end to a WrestleMania of all time. So Yokozuna beats Bret Hart to become the World Wrestling Federation champion. Hulk Hogan comes out to protest the decision, and then Mr. Fuji there and then challenges Hulk Hogan to a WWF title match. I mean, that just makes you look like an idiot. Your client's just won the title and now you're going to challenge a fresh Hulk Hogan. Then 22 seconds later, Hulk Hogan beats Yokozuna and now Hulk Hogan is the WWF champion. My God. I don't want to talk too much about this because I'm just going to sound like a bit of Hitman fan, but that was just a terrible end to a WrestleMania. Then the rest of the card was just ranged from average to poor. I mean, the Mega Maniacs versus Money Inc. match was just kind of long and boring. Mr. Perfect versus Lex Luger was a disappointment. Undertaker versus Giant Gonzalez may well be the worst WrestleMania match of all time. Just an awful match. Crushing Doink wasn't particularly good. Yeah, Razor Ramon and Bob Backlund just didn't really work either. So all that makes WrestleMania 9 a lower tier WrestleMania. Coming in number 37, WrestleMania 6. For me, the most overrated WrestleMania of all time. I mean, a lot of fans see this as a WrestleMania classic, but I just don't see it. I think the main event's awesome and huge. That's Hulk Hogan versus the Ultimate Warrior for the World WWF versus the Intercontinental title for title, the Ultimate Challenge. That was a genuinely great main event, one of the most memorable WrestleMania main events of all time. But the rest of the card was just kind of shit. I mean, you had Jake versus DiBiase. That was a good match. Not a fantastic match, but a good match. Then you had a really good moment on the show as well with Andre the Giant's babyface turn at the end of the tag title match between Demolition and Andre and Haku. That was a really cool moment, but the rest of the card ranged from average, such as the Rockers versus the Orient Express. Brutus Beefcake beat Mr. Perfect in a decent match. Tito Santana put over the Barbarian in a decent match as well. And you had a Hart Foundation squashing the Bolsheviks. Then you had quite a bit of crap on here. I mean, Rick Martel versus Coco Beware is a so-so opener. I mean, you had Akeem versus Big Boss Man. That sucked. Dino Bravo versus Hacksaw Jim Duggan. That was a pretty bad match. Yeah. And then two big matches that just really under-delivered. Roddy Piper versus Bad News Brown. This is actually cut from the Peacock/Network version of the show, because Roddy Piper decided it would be cool to paint himself half black. That does not age well. But then the match was actually awful as well. Then the mixed tag match with Macho King, and Sensational Sherry versus Dusty Rhodes and Sapphire. Ugh, that was a bad match. It really was. Overall, I just didn't like the WrestleMania 6. I just didn't think it was a particularly good show. Now, coming in at 36, WrestleMania 13. If there's ever been a one-match WrestleMania ever, this would be it. If it wasn't for that one match, this would definitely be in the top 2 or 3 worst WrestleManias of all time. And that obviously, the highlight obviously is the classic Bret Hart versus Stone Cold Steve Austin submission match. In my book, the greatest match in WrestleMania history. Just a complete classic. Love this match so much. Don't need to go into too much detail as to why. I mean, you've heard it all before. Just believe, if you haven't seen this match, just believe the hype around it. That the epic Bret and Austin double turn and really the launch of Stone Cold Steve Austin as he would become. You got a couple of good stuff on there as well. I mean, the Ahmed Johnson Legion of Doom versus Nation street fight was really entertaining for the time. Owen Hart and the British Bulldog versus Vader and Mankind. This didn't have any real story behind it, but it was a good match. It didn't. I think the big problem for a lot of this show is, besides Bret and Austin, nothing else really, and maybe the Ahmed Nation street fight, nothing really felt WrestleMania quality level. There was no story behind this tag title match. It was a sound match, but it was two heel teams. There was no real issue between them and all that. And then they had Triple H, Hunter Hearst Helmsley versus Goldust. This at least had some story to it, because he's been feuding for quite a while. But this match was good. It wasn't great. Certainly not one of the more memorable Triple H WrestleMania matches. Then you had Undertaker Sid. This was just not a very good main event. I mean, because of stuff like Shawn Michaels losing his smile and walking out and all that. No, he didn't walk out, but he said he was injured and all that. And this main event just felt cobbled together. There wasn't a big issue between Taker and Sid. There wasn't a hot story, and it was just two big guys that just didn't really click. And then they had like a near 20-minute match. It just came across as really boring. Then you had Rocky Maivia versus the Sultan, and that was really just a poor Intercontinental title match. That one just didn't really click at all. Then a pretty pointless 4-way tag team match between Headbangers, Godwins, New Blackjacks, Doug Furnas and Phil LaFon. That was just what it was. So, although WWF was starting to be coming to a great time, this show just wasn't very good. Then we got, coming in number 35, WrestleMania 27. Just not a good show. Not a good show. I mean, yeah, just this wasn't a very good show. I mean, Triple H and The Undertaker had a somewhat of a classic. I mean, that was a really big part of the Triple H, Undertaker, Shawn Michaels story arc of 4 years. I mean, this was a great match and all, but I think it was just a huge device to get the following year, and that's kind of a theme around the show. This show just kind of felt like a placeholder to get to a much bigger WrestleMania 28, which we'll talk about later in the video. But that Taker Triple H match was excellent. You had some good stuff on there. I mean, CM Punk and Randy Orton had a nice gem of a match. That's actually a pretty underrated WrestleMania gem to me. I thought that was actually pretty good. Rey Mysterio versus Cody Rhodes was a good match as well. I wouldn't say a great match, but a good match. And then at the time, what we thought was Edge's last ever match, him versus Alberto Del Rio for the World Heavyweight title. That was good. But then, let's face it, are we allowed to admit The Rock as guest host just was kind of I mean, The Rock's are we allowed to admit The Rock's opening promo was just kind of not particularly great? Can we do that now? I mean, it's been 11 years. I think it's alright now, isn't it, that we can say this wasn't very good? Fuck no. Tell a lie, 12 years. Bloody hell. But yeah, and then the main event is Cena and Miz. Just not WrestleMania main event worthy. This was definitely in the lower tier WrestleMania main event. It had to be. I mean, the problem was, I feel like Miz just felt like Miz just didn't feel important. This, much like to take a Triple H match, was all about just a device to get the Cena versus The Rock the following year. And then we also had that pretty pointless 8-man tag match with the Core versus, I think it was Kane, Big Show, Santino and Kofi Kingston. That was short and to the point. Probably the Snookies tag team match was probably the lamest WrestleMania celebrity match of all time. It was Lay Cool and Dolph Ziggler versus John Morrison, Trish Stratus and Snooki. I mean, this is when the Jersey Shore was popular. I mean, is Snooki even relevant at all now? I don't think so. Yeah, that was just bad. And then, do we even need to talk about Jerry Lawler versus Michael Cole? I don't think we do. So then, coming in number 34, WrestleMania 36 Night 1. I mean, for me, these WrestleManias are always going to... WrestleMania 36 is always going to be the most unique WrestleManias of all time. Because only WrestleMania, and hopefully the only ever WrestleMania, to not have a crowd. I mean, obviously, think back, this was April 2020, so the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, yeah, it was this is even before the Thunderdome as well. I mean, if they'd come up with the Thunderdome concept earlier, this WrestleMania might have come across better, but just looking back now especially, I mean, I think we gave it a pass at the time because it was weird circumstances, but just looking back now, it comes across poorly. So you had two WrestleManias obviously there. This one, for me, is the worst of the two. It wasn't terrible or anything like that, but it just didn't come across well. I mean, obviously, I think this is going to be always remembered for the Undertaker AJ Styles Boneyard match. I mean, for me, during the 2020-2021 pandemic era of cinematic matches, this is probably my favourite cinematic manic match of the lot. It was so well done, and looks like it's going to be ultimately the Undertaker's last ever match. And to be fair, he went out on something pretty good. Then I will give props to the three-way ladder match between Jimmy Uso, Kofi Kingston and John Morrison. Now this was supposed to be a three-way title ladder match with Usos, New Day and Miz and Morrison. But if I remember right, I think the Miz took ill before the match and then pulled out. And then we got a three-way singles match for the SmackDown Tag Team titles. I mean, mad respect to those guys for taking all those crazy bumps in a time where there was no crowd and no heat or anything like that. And then we had some good stuff on here as well. I mean, Edge versus Orton. This is a match that I feel, looking back now, I feel I massively overrated this match at the time. I mean, I'd give this match, when I did the original review, 4 stars. But now I'm thinking, was I just being generous because it was Edge's first match back and all that? And Edge is one of my favourite guys. But looking back, the match wasn't great. I would probably now rate it about 3 stars. Because I think it just was too long. And I think of all the matches that was hurt badly by not having a crowd, this was probably the one. Because they were just fighting around the performance centre, and obviously there was no crowd and all that, no atmosphere, and it just hurted. I mean, fair play, great effort. They put a lot of effort in there and all that. Then you had the women's tag team title match, was a pretty good opener. Kevin Owens versus Seth Rollins was another good match. And then you had stuff like Strowman versus Goldberg. That was terrible. That was just awful. Now, say Daniel Bryan versus Sami Zayn was a pretty big disappointment. Honestly, just feel like that's a really big disappointment. I really do. That match should have been a hell of a lot better than it was. What else was on here? And then Becky Lynch versus Shayna Baszler. I mean, that was quite disappointing as well. That was an average match. And Elias versus Baron Corbin. That just wasn't very good either. Then we got number 33, WrestleMania 4. I have a slight soft spot for this WrestleMania. I do take into account that the actual in-ring wrestling isn't particularly good, but I think it was a really well. I liked the tournament. It was something different, and I feel like they booked the tournament quite well. I mean, as the night went on, life progressed and all that. But if you want a good wrestling show from this era, I would highly suggest watching the first Clash of the Champions that went opposite this show. But this was built around the tournament to be crowned the undisputed World Wrestling Federation champion. I mean, for in-ring action, nothing really to shout about. I mean, I feel like Ricky Steamboat and Greg Valentine had an actual WrestleMania gem. Also, I think Savage versus Valentine in the quarterfinals was pretty good. But this was all about the tournament, really. And what I do, because obviously your natural conclusion would think Hulk Hogan's just going to get the title back. But in the second round, Hogan and Andre received byes from the first round. They wrestled each other in the second round. Then Hogan and Andre both got disqualified for using a chair. And then the plan became clear because DiBiase and Hogan were on the same sides of the bracket. DiBiase was going to pay Andre to sacrifice himself to eliminate Hogan from the tournament, and that led to DiBiase beating Don Morocco to get a bye from the semi-final all the way to the final. So DiBiase was using Andre to get rid of Hogan to give DiBiase an easier run to the title, and that led to Savage doing the honourable babyface thing by having 4 matches on the show. He beat Butch Reed in the first round, beat Greg the Hammer Valentine in the second round, and then the semi-final he faced the huge man, the one-man gang, a guy who himself got a bye from the quarterfinals because Jake Roberts and Rick Rude went to a time limit draw. Savage got by him, and then the main event, Randy Savage versus Ted DiBiase is in the final. This was a good match, not a great one, because obviously I think this was like less than 10 minutes, because I think the show was running along at this point. And Savage was in his 4th match, DiBiase was in his 3rd, so they have better house show matches out there. I mean, if you see some of the live event matches that were taped around this time, most of them are a lot better than this one. But this was a good match. I mean, this had the end of the Hogan costing DiBiase the title, and then Savage, Macho Man, becoming the World Wrestling Federation champion. And really, The end of this show was really there to build up a WrestleMania 5. I mean, and then but let's face it, most of the tournament matches were meh. Apart from like the three I mentioned, the rest of the tournament matches aren't particularly good. And the undercard as well, nothing. I mean, Demolition versus Strikeforce was a pretty decent match, and of course, that led to Demolition becoming the WWE Tag Team Champion, and arguably the greatest tag team title reign of all time. And you had the Honky Tonk Man versus Brutus Beefcake for the Intercontinental title. That was a very mediocre match. The opening Battle Royal was okay for a Battle Royal, I suppose, but it did lead to Bret Hart's babyface turn. And then the 6-man tag of the British Bulldogs and Coco Beware versus the Islanders and Bobby Heenan was entertaining enough, but nothing worth shouting about. Then coming number 32, WrestleMania 38 Night 2. I mean, the first night of WrestleMania last year was really good, which we'll get into. But the second night was And I think this is something WWE needs to try and do better this year. Try and get both WrestleMania nights to be similar quality, good quality, obviously. Because it just felt like night 1 last year was so much better than night 2. So, feels like to me, WWE put all the best stuff out on night 1 and just night 2 was just lacking in general. I mean, for me, the highlight of last year was the Edge AJ Styles match. That wasn't that was actually, I would say, a mildly disappointing match, because I think a lot of people are expecting a WrestleMania classic from Edge and AJ, but they did have a great match, I can't deny that. Then the main event, Lesnar versus Reigns, well, certainly better than other Brock Lesnar versus Roman Reigns matches at WrestleMania, wasn't it? So yeah, it wasn't the worst Lesnar. It was a good match. It was a good match. It wasn't a great match. Probably again, maybe mildly disappointing, because this was built as like a huge match to unify the WWE Universal titles, and it just didn't feel like the biggest match as WWE hyped it up to be. I mean, at least we finally got Roman Reigns beating Brock Lesnar clean at WrestleMania. Because God knows they tried that over and over again, but it just never clicked. So at least we got the right ending. I mean, Sami Zayn versus Johnny Knoxville, I mean, that may be the highlight of last year's WrestleMania Night 2, to be fair. Obviously, Edge and AJ was a better match, but I would say Sami Zayn and Johnny Knoxville was a more memorable match. Overall, that was just a really, really fun match. Sami Zayn, Johnny Knoxville, I mean, probably the best comedy match of all time. And you had a pretty good Raw Tag Team title match to open up the show. The women's tag title match was fine, I guess. The McAfee Theory match, that was a good match. I wouldn't say a great one, but that did lead to the worst part of WrestleMania last year. The impromptu Vince McMahon versus Pat McAfee match, and what I fucking well hope is going to be the last time Vince ever gets in the ring. Hopefully. Yeah, honestly, this is the only part that I actively hated about WrestleMania. It just felt like a massive ego trip for 76-year-old Vince to get in the ring with Pat McAfee. And of course, he's a 76-year-old man. How would you expect? He looked awful. How would you expect him to look? Even a specimen like Vince McMahon is still a 76-year-old guy. And that led to post-match Vince taking the worst stunner in the history of stunners. I mean, seriously, you thought the stunner he took back at back in 1997 was bad. This was just atrocious. Then you had Lashley versus Omos, which, oh god. Yes, for some reason Omos is facing Brock Lesnar this year. Well, but he faced Bobby Lashley last year, and it wasn't particularly good. And then a completely thrown on the card New Day versus the Brawling Brutes match. So this was a so-so WrestleMania. Then we're going to go number 31, WrestleMania 25. Just feels like this is a disappointing WrestleMania. And it feels a lot like WrestleMania 13 with it being a one-match show. But that one-match show being generally one of, if not the greatest WrestleMania match of all time. Put it this way, if you say Undertaker versus Shawn Michaels in WrestleMania 25 is the best match in WrestleMania history, I'm not going to tell you you're wrong. I mean, I would go with Bret Austin personally, but I couldn't argue with anyone saying Undertaker versus Shawn. I mean, a true bona fide classic. I mean, 14 years later, it's still as amazing as it was back in 2009. But overall, this show just felt lacking. Just felt like lacking something. I mean, you had some good stuff on there. I mean, the Money in the Bank ladder match was actually a nice gem of an opener. Matt and Jeff in the Extreme Rules match was a good match, not a great one. I mean, the World Heavyweight title match was technically a sound match. That was John Cena versus Edge versus The Big Show. But it just didn't feel like a big WrestleMania title match. And then you had some average like little Jericho versus Legends match. The match itself was nothing really special, but I did absolutely love Ricky Steamboat's performance in this match. I mean, that was just so cool to see. Then the main event, Triple H versus Randy Orton, probably one of the most disappointing WrestleMania main events. I mean, honest to God, I feel like the build-up for this show was awesome. I really do. Like, honestly, like, go back and watch the build-up of that show. This felt like you just wanted these two guys to tear each other's heads off. Then you had the standard wrestling match. After all that build, you're just going to have them have a wrestling match? Huh? So yeah, it just didn't come across well. Triple H won, whatever. Then Rey Mysterio squashed JBL in like 20 odd seconds and what turned out to be JBL's last ever match. Then the Miss WrestleMania Battle Royal. We don't need to go there, do we? So coming in at number 30, WrestleMania 36, Night 2. So I would say this is slightly better than Night 1, but not by a lot. Like I said before, the lack of atmosphere and all that really hurt. And I think the highlight is probably Charlotte Flair versus Rhea Ripley opener. That was an awesome match, actually. And they did their best to have a great match in front of nobody. But yeah, this was actually a genuinely great match, despite the fact that Rhea Ripley should have won. But hey, she's probably going to win it this year, so we got there eventually. Then I would say the Firefly Funhouse match between John Cena versus The Fiend. This was just one of the most unique. I kind of even feel weird calling it a match because they didn't actually do anything really. It just felt like a massive. Because I've never actually done acid before, but I imagine this is what having an acid trip would look like, something like this. It was just one of the most bizarre, unique and weirdly entertaining things in WrestleMania history. You know, a couple of solid matches on there, like Bobby Lashley versus Aleister Black was a fine match. Then the SmackDown Women's match was okay. The main event, Lesnar versus Drew McIntyre, again, that just was not a good WrestleMania main event. It was really short. You just spammed a lot of big moves. And like I say, the lack of atmosphere just completely ruined it. I mean, it's awesome. It's cool that Drew got his moment to become a WWE champion. Just a shame they never had it in front of a crowd. They had a fairly average Raw Tag title match with Street Profits versus Angel Garza and Austin Theory. Yeah, that's a weird team, isn't it? Then the Otis Ziggler match, that was never going to be very good. But this moment between Mandy Rose and Otis is something that absolutely 100% needed a crowd. Then we got coming in number 29, and I hate to say this because it's a big one, WrestleMania 1. I mean, if we're being honest, WrestleMania 1, if you want to look at it as a wrestling show, mediocre. If you want to look at it as an overall spectacle, really good. I mean, this was not a show aimed at die-hard wrestling fans. If you want to see a great 80s show, watch one of the old Starcade, like Starcade 83 or Starcade 85 or something like that. Or even one of the Crockett Cups or whatever. This wasn't it. This was designed as to be an entertaining spectacle to draw new fans, and it did that. I mean, this is the one that started it all. Without the success of WrestleMania 1, we're not here, what's it now? 37 years? Yeah. What year are we in? Fucking hell. Yeah, we wouldn't be here nearly 40 years later, 38 years down the line, coming up to WrestleMania 39 if it wasn't for the success of this show. But if you're looking at it objectively, this show was just not particularly great. I mean, the main event was entertaining as hell. Hulk Hogan and Mr. T versus Roddy Piper and Paul Orndorff. And then you had it. The only other real highlight I could pick out was Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov against US Express for the WWF Tag Team titles. Historic for being the first title change in WrestleMania history. But the rest of the card ranged from average to poor. I mean, you had Ricky Steamboat versus Matt Bourne. That was a good little match, I guess. You had a decent squash between King Kong Bundy Squash and SD Jones. Then you had the women's title match between Wendy Richter and Leilani Kai was okay. Then Tito Santana versus Execution was a perfectly decent opener. I mean, it was always going to be historic. Answer the trivia question: what was the first match in WrestleMania history? Tito Santana versus the Executioner. There we go. Then Andre versus Stud was pretty bad, but it was cool that Andre slammed Stud. Then for some reason, the longest undercard match on the show was David Sammartino versus Brutus Beefcake. So really, all these undercard matches you dick for time, and the match you do give time to was Brutus Beefcake versus David Sammartino. Okay. Then I just feel like JYD versus Greg Valentine just did not click. Though, yeah. Then come number 28, WrestleMania 18. Honestly, such a disappointing show. Being given the roster that the company had at the time, this could have been an all-timer. It really could have been. This could have been a truly great WrestleMania, but we only have a so-so one. And of course, this is sandwiched between two epic WrestleManias, which we'll get to later in the video. WrestleMania 17 and WrestleMania 19. In between that, you get WrestleMania 18. I mean, this is only going to be memorable for one reason, really. Hogan versus Rock. That was amazing. As an actual match, it was average, but overall spectacle, just unbelievable atmosphere. A real iconic match, one of the biggest WrestleMania matches of all time, and a match that every single wrestler fan has to watch at least once in their life, in my opinion. And then find some undercard positive. I mean, Undertaker versus Ric Flair had a really nice brawl on a really nice no holds barred match. It just felt like an old school gritty Southern NWA style brawl, just bloody and gritty and all that. Probably the most underrated Undertaker streak match ever, and also historic, as this is the one that got taken to 10-0. Then you had Kurt Angle versus Kane. That was a good match, not a great match. I feel like there's a lot of this show has the same problem. This match did not feel WrestleMania worthy. This was more like a Judgment Day match or a Vengeance match, not a WrestleMania match. Then also, DDP and Christian actually had a nice little gem on the undercard as well. So that was pretty cool, I guess. But then the rest, I mean, Triple H versus Jericho, just for many... So technically this was the WrestleMania main event. It went on last, but we all know what the real main event was, don't we? But yeah, and just the build-up just was bad, and the heat just wasn't there because fans were so exhausted after Hogan versus Rock. And the obvious issue is you'd have to be a complete moron to see the build-up and see the presentation, and think Chris Jericho had a sniff of winning this match, because he absolutely didn't. This will be a theme for Triple H's career, I'm afraid. Disappointing WrestleMania main events. They've got Steve Austin versus Scott Hall. This might be the lamest main event career match of Steve Austin ever. I mean, this was just a poor WrestleMania match for him. I mean, it just, again, Austin Hall, does this feel WrestleMania worthy? And I think Austin clearly felt the same thing, because he looked bored and totally pissed off during this match. The tag title match was alright. The women's title match literally had the most impossible job ever to follow Hogan Rock. It just wasn't going to happen. RVD versus Regal was an average opener. Goldust versus Maven was meh. Although I will say all the 24/7 shit going down during the night was actually kind of fun. Especially Christian slamming the door into Mighty Molly's face. That was great. And then fucking Maven, the bastard, pinning Christian and then just nicking his taxi. Shocking. What a thief. Then come in number 27, WrestleMania 2000. Similar sentiments to WrestleMania 18, really. Just a massively disappointing show. I would probably say the most disappointing WrestleMania of all time for me. I mean, this time is one of my favourite time periods of all time as a wrestling fan. But the truth is, the company just really missed its mark on WrestleMania. I mean, look at some of the shows he had around this time. The following month, Backlash was an all-timer. This show was Basically, it really was. They were just really weirdly booked with only one singles match on the show, and that was the Cat versus Terry Runnels. The obvious highlight has to be the triangle ladder match. Hardy's, Dudley's, Edge and Christian. I feel like these two, Shawn and Razor set the standards for the ladder match, set the blueprint. These two guys, these three teams evolved the ladder match into what it more is today. The classic match. And then the main event was good, the Fatal 4-Way, but I don't know, I just feel the McMahon every corner thing bad. Mick Foley should never came out retirement. Big Show just didn't look like he belonged in there. It should have been Triple H versus The Rock. But this was a good match, not a great one. Then also a good little match was there. Triple Threat European Intercontinental title. 2 falls triple threat match. Which is a cool concept which you've never done since. Chris Benoit versus Chris Jericho versus the Intercontinental and European Champion, or as Kurt Angle you say, the Euro-Continental Champion, Kurt Angle. And Angle lost both belts in that match without being pinned. Then the Hardcore Battle Royal for the Hardcore title was quite fun overall, I thought. But then the rest of the show is just kind of eh. There's not a lot here that's active. There's one thing in here that's actively terrible. I mean, we'll get to that. Cat versus Terry Runnels cat fight. It was a shit match, but of course it was going to be. Neither Cat nor Terry were really wrestlers, so what the hell were you expecting? So you had Too Cool and China versus the Radicals. That was a decent undercard match. Kane and Rikishi versus Road Dogg and X-Pac. That just felt like, should this really be on WrestleMania sort of thing? This felt like a middle of the card Raw match. TNA versus Head Cheese again. Is this WrestleMania quality? And especially Bossman and Bull Buchanan versus Godfather and D'Lo Brown. You're putting this on WrestleMania, really. Now we're going to 26 WrestleMania 32. Now this is a weird one for me because I looked back at my old review for this show and I'd give this show 7.5 out of 10. And this is back in 2016 when it happened. Now I'm looking at that and thinking, what the fuck was I thinking? Why the fuck did I think this was an almost great WrestleMania? I don't know. There's a weird one. Sometimes I look back at some of my old reviews and think, what was I thinking? But yeah, this was an alright WrestleMania. I mean, this was the first WrestleMania that went super long. This is the first one that went nearly 5 hours. That unfortunately became a bad trend over the years since. And because of that, and I think what you get with from WrestleMania 32 to WrestleMania 35 is a wildly inconsistent show. You're going to have some great stuff in there. You're going to have some average stuff in there. You're going to have some terrible stuff in there as well. And that's sort of the case here. So there are some positives for this show. I mean, I feel like the women's title match stole the show. Charlotte Flair versus Sasha Banks versus Becky Lynch. Great match. The IC title ladder match was pretty great as an opener as well. But you had Zack Ryder win, which is cool, I guess, but just 4 years too late. And I feel like Jericho versus AJ actually had I think looking back now, a really underrated WrestleMania match. The problem was Jericho won, which is pretty stupid because that was the 50-50 shite, and then AJ became no one contender the next night anyway, so that just felt kind of pointless. I mean, Undertaker versus Shane, this was good. I think a lot of people don't like this match at all, but I think it was a good match, and I think a lot of people hold the build-up and the storyline against it, which, okay, that's fine, if that's what you want. But I think the match was good. Was it too long? Yeah, probably. Was it slightly not believable for Shane to be so competitive against The Undertaker? Yeah, probably. But it's probably one of Undertaker's last really good matches. I mean, apart from... it was a good match. It wasn't a great one. It wasn't one of the most memorable Undertaker matches of all time. But it was a good one. And they had New Day versus League of Nations. That was fine. But I didn't like the end of Austin, Mick Foley and Shawn Michaels just beating up all the new guys. I really didn't. And Lesnar and Brown. Now this is a match I massively owe. I went 3.5 stars at the time. But I would definitely lower my rating for this one now. I think I'll say 3 stars at the most. This was a disappointing match. I mean, a lot of people might not remember how excited... how excited people were for this match. This could have been like awesome story of just Lesnar just destroying Ambrose, but Ambrose being that crazy motherfucker that keeps getting back up. But it just wasn't. It just wasn't that. It was very flat. And then the Rock Wyatt segment, nah. Didn't do much for me, to be honest. Then the main event, Lesnar versus Reigns. That was not a good WrestleMania match. Let's face it, Roman Reigns is a big star now, but at the time, people didn't like Roman Reigns, did they not? That's just what it is. People just weren't invested in this match. It was at the end of a long show. This is a long and boring match with a predictable winner. Then what else was on there? Oh, yeah, the Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal happened. So yeah, and then number 35. So I've said from here on end, all these WrestleManias are at least good. So from here on in, I'll be saying more positive stuff than negative stuff. And that's WrestleMania 34. Now, much like the rest of WrestleMania 32, this was just a wildly inconsistent show. I mean, because it was 5 hours long, there was some great stuff on here, there was some good stuff on here, there was some average stuff on here, and there was some terrible stuff on here. So, I just feel like, I'll come back to this point later on in the video, but yeah, just feel like it was too long. I mean, what was great on here was actually great. I mean, what a fantastic opener between Seth Rollins, The Miz and Finn Balor for the Intercontinental title. That was genuinely one of the better WrestleMania openers for me. That was a great title match. Then I think the obvious highlight of this show was Ronda Rousey and Kurt Angle versus Triple H and Stephanie McMahon tag match. I mean, seriously, whoever agented that match deserves a medal. I mean, they did a fantastic job of hiding everybody's flaws and emphasising the strengths. And they had a genuinely excellent match. And it was a great way for Ronda Rousey to start a career. Could we please find that Ronda Rousey in 2023? That would be great. Then also I think Charlotte versus Asuka. I thought this was a fantastic match. I really do. And to this day I defended the decision to have Charlotte end that streak. Because if you're going to end Asuka's streak, do it at WrestleMania. Do it with arguably the biggest, most credible star on the roster. But that was a great match. Then you had some, so Nakamura versus AJ Styles was a good match. But yeah, has to be in the short list of most disappointing WrestleMania matches of all time. This could have been and should have been a classic. I mean, we've seen what these guys can do. They had that Wrestle Kingdom Classic in 2016. Here at WrestleMania 34, they had a good match. By any standard, that AJ Nakamura match was good. It just should have been amazing, but it wasn't. Then I'll say Daniel Bryan and Shane McMahon versus Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn was good. That was a good match. Not a great match, a good match. Then I'll say Undertaker coming back to squash John Cena was probably the best thing, all things considered. I mean, this match just happened too late. It just happened too late in the game, didn't it? And I feel like a 15-minute match would have exposed the Undertaker, so I was fine with what it did. And I'll say the rest range from average to bad. I mean, that main event, Lesnar versus Reigns 2, just a really poorly received WrestleMania main event. It really was just a bad match overall. Not a bad match. Yeah, it was a bad match. Then the SmackDown tag title match with Usos, New Day and Bludgeon Brothers was a decent match. Nia Jax versus Alexa Bliss. I honestly feel like that match should have been a complete squash. I did feel like that would have been so much better if it was a squash match. They had a decent Raw tag title match. The 4-way for the US title was okay. So yeah, so overall I'll say WrestleMania 34 was good. Now coming in number 24, WrestleMania 27 Night 2. So going back to 2 years ago now, so Night 2. So obviously, as you can deduce, I've got Night 1 as being better than Night 2. We'll get that later on. So, see, overall this was good, not great. I think obviously the biggest standout has to be Roman Reigns versus Edge versus Daniel Bryan main event. I mean, I love that match. That is even in the upper tier of WrestleMania main events. That was just such an awesome WrestleMania main event, it really was. And arguably Reigns' best title defense to date, in my opinion. was not that, it's at least in the top 3 for sure. Then you got Sheamus versus Matt Riddle. That's I actually now feel like that's a really underrated WrestleMania gem. That was just a really good, hard-hitting match for the US title. I very much enjoyed. Oh yeah, I thought it was a really good match, to be fair. They got Rhea Ripley versus Asuka. That was a good match as well. Not a fantastic match, but a good one. Kevin Owens versus Sami Zayn. That was another good match as well. I mean, it was kind of Owens Zayn hitting the greatest hits and all that. But that must have been a big thrill for them to have a WrestleMania match. And then the rest was kind of... I mean, Apollo Crews versus Big E for the Intercontinental title was alright match. I thought the women's tag title match wasn't very good, but the biggest crap thing from that WrestleMania was Randy Orton versus The Fiend. That killed The Fiend off for good, and it was just a bad match, bad execution, bad booking and all that. So coming in number 23, WrestleMania 29. So 10 years ago, this was definitely a WrestleMania in the middle. Not one of the best WrestleManias, but as you can see for this list, far from the worst WrestleMania of all time. I feel like remember, anticipation wasn't very high for this show, but I think overall the in-ring action was good enough. I mean, obviously this was built around 3 big matches. The one that really stood out was John Cena, but not so fucking. What am I saying? Undertaker versus CM Punk. That actually ended up, what we didn't know at the time, would be the last match in the Undertaker's famous streak. Undertaker went 21-0 that night to win that match, and what we didn't know is what was going to happen the next year with the streak breaking. But yeah, this match was fantastic. It really was. I really liked. Yeah, this match was great. CM Punk and Undertaker absolutely tore the house down. And for me, this was probably the beginning of the end for the Undertaker. This is probably the last time Undertaker truly looked like the Undertaker in the ring. I take that back. The 2 Lesnar matches in 2015, he looked really good as well. But as far on the WrestleMania stage, this was probably the last time we got a truly awesome Undertaker match. And then Triple H versus Brock Lesnar no holds barred match. I just didn't see the need for this match. That's the problem. I just didn't feel like this match really needed to happen at all. I feel like that's the biggest problem with this match. It's a rematch that nobody really wanted, is the best way I can put it, I think. But the match was fine. It was just kind of fine, and Triple H won. Then obviously twice in a lifetime, Cena versus Rock. Just didn't like this match. It was just a finisher spam, and I just generally did not want to see it. They had some good undercard matches on that. I mean, The Shield versus Randy Orton, Big Show and Sheamus was a good opener. Del Rio versus Swagger, that was solid but unspectacular. That just did not feel like a big WrestleMania match. Then Team Hell No versus Dolph Ziggler and Big E Langston, again, a good match. Then you had the only really negatives were Jericho versus Fandango. I mean, that's crazy to think about. Chris Jericho put over Fandango at WrestleMania. Looking back what happened in hindsight. Then Ryback and Mark Henry just wasn't good. So yeah, then coming in number 22, WrestleMania 12. I feel like this is quite an underrated WrestleMania, because this didn't have the glitz and glamour of previous WrestleManias. I mean, there was actually no celebrity involvement at all at this year's WrestleMania. Vince was at a time where popularity was down, so he just focused on having a wrestling show. And something interesting I found over the last few years, to me it feels like a lot of younger fans seem to enjoy this show. I mean, I'm talking about people that weren't watching at the time and maybe didn't see this show for like 10 plus years after it happened. So those sort of fans seem to like this WrestleMania. That's just an interesting observation. So it's a 6-match show, but I would say every match but one is a good match. See, obviously the highlight for me, the Bret and Shawn Iron Man match, the most divisive WrestleMania match in history. I'm in the camp that it was a classic. It's one of my all-time favourite matches, and obviously the big moment of Shawn Michaels winning the WWF title at the end. But I think that sometimes it's been unfairly labelled a one-match show, but you had some good stuff in there. I mean, you had Undertaker versus Diesel, that was like the first genuinely good match in Undertaker's streak. Not a classic or anything, but a pretty good big man match. Then you had the WrestleMania debut with Steve Austin against Savio Vega. The match wasn't that memorable, but I thought it was actually a technically fine match. Then, for me, what I thought was the Hollywood Backlog brawl between Roddy Piper and Goldust. As a kid, I thought this match was entertaining as hell. And looking back now, is this the first ever real proper cinematic match in WWF history? Yeah. Then we had a good 6-man tag team opening with Yokozuna, Ahmed Johnson and Jake the Snake Roberts against Vader, Owen Hart and the British Bulldog. Now, Ultimate Warrior coming back to face Triple H was cool. That was a cool moment. But it was a total squash. Warrior just made Triple H look like a really big chump in that match. And ultimately, Warrior's 1996 return wasn't successful, so... But yeah, I'll say overall it's a good show. Now, coming in number 21, WrestleMania 8. Now, this is the one I've kind of had to be honest with myself over the years. When I was younger, I rated this WrestleMania really high. Thought this was one of the better WrestleManias. But if I'm being honest, it really wasn't. You had two genuinely awesome matches on this show. Ric Flair, Randy Savage for the WWF title. That's a WrestleMania classic. That's actually an awesome match between two 80s legends wrestling each other for the title in 1992. And then Bret Hart, probably one of Bret's big breakout matches as singles. Bret Hart versus Roddy Piper for the Intercontinental title. I think it was, because I think beating Mr. Perfect for SummerSlam 91 for the Intercontinental title was great and all. But I think beating a legend like Roddy Piper at WrestleMania was just that much bigger and catapulted Bret that much more. Yeah, that was just genuinely great match. And then you had the main event, Undertaker versus Sid. That was a bad main event, let's be honest. I did not like that main event at all. And we're not going to go on how it should have been Hogan versus Flair. That's been done to death. But it did lead to a genuinely great moment at the end where Pat Shango and Sid are beating down Hogan. And the Ultimate Warrior makes his WWF comeback to save Hulk Hogan, and Hogan and Warrior celebrate at the end of the show. This was 92 where surprise returns were actually a thing. But if we're being honest, apart from that, the rest of the show is really average to bad. You had Shawn Michaels' first singles WrestleMania match against El Matador on this show, but that was just such a disappointing match, it really was. Then you had Undertaker went 2-0 as he beat 80s legends Jake the Snake Roberts. It was a relatively entertaining squash match, fine. But then the rest of the show, you had an 8-man tag team match, completely unrememberable, with Hacksaw Jim Duggan, Sergeant Slaughter, Virgil and Big Boss Man against the Nasty Boys, the Mountain and Repo Man. Tatanka versus Rick Martel was a met match. And I think the Natural Disasters versus Money Inc. just wasn't very good. Then you had Owen Hart and Skinner in a squash, so... Overall, this was a good WrestleMania, but a WrestleMania I think it tends to get overrated. So now we're in the top 20, so now we're getting more into that. I've got a lot longer than I was expecting to, so we're probably going to have a 2-hour video, so I apologise for that, guys. I've gone a bit too long again. So coming in number 20, WrestleMania 5. That is, if you cut out a lot of the filler, this could have been one of the best WrestleManias of all time. But I think the problem is just that. Too much filler. Because the early WrestleManias, what they would do is they would cram 12, 13, sometimes 14 matches on the show to get as many people on the show as possible. But unlike what they would do in later years, this would still be like a 3.5 hour pay-per-view. So what you do is have a lot of matches that were like 5-6 minutes, or if you're lucky, a couple of 10-minute matches, then a couple of squashes. So there's a lot of varying quality on this show. But I think there's a lot to like about this show, though. This was probably at the height of the 80s popularity of WWF and all that. Obviously the main event, the Mega Powers explode, Hulk Hogan versus Macho Man Randy Savage. I thought this was a great match, I really did. I like this match a lot. This is probably, I would say, the best Hogan WrestleMania match. I would say a personal favourite is probably Hogan versus Rock, because that's one I saw in real time and all that. But for objective quality, I'll say this Hogan Savage match maybe be Hogan's best match ever. Then you had some of the undercard was good. I mean, you had Ultimate Warrior versus Rick Rude for the Intercontinental title. This wasn't as great as the SummerSlam match you had later that year, but it was a pretty good match and notable for the first time Ultimate Warrior was ever pinned in the WWF. And I know it wasn't clean, but still, Rick Rude won the Intercontinental title that show. Mr. Perfect versus the Blue Blazer was a bit of a gem. Just a shame it was just over 5 minutes, so I mean, given twice as long, they could have had something really special. But it was a nice little match. Similarly, Brainbusters versus Strikeforce. Good match, just too short. Give it a little bit more time, it would have been probably awesome. They had the WrestleMania debut of Shawn Michaels as the Rockers took on the Twin Towers in a good big team, little team match. So the rest of the show ranges from average to bad. I mean, you had Hart Foundation versus Honky Tonk Man and Greg Valentine in an okay match. Hercules versus King Haku had a so-so opener. Ted DiBiase versus Brutus Beefcake was a decent match. I thought with Demolition versus Powers and Pain and Mr. Fuji was alright. Then Ronnie Garvin versus Dino Bravo wasn't very good. But then the negatives really are Red Rooster versus Bobby Heenan in a total squash. They had the Piper's Pit segment with Roddy Piper and Morty Downey Jr. just went on forever and ever and was just boring. And then really the two terrible matches on the show, the Bushwhackers versus the Fabulous Rougeaus and Bad News Brown versus Hacksaw Jim Duggan. But I'll say good WrestleMania overall. So coming in number 19, WrestleMania 37 Night 1. So this goes down. This was the first WWE show to have a crowd in 13 months. So over a year. But because of that, the atmosphere was there and it did feel like a quite a fairly important WrestleMania. But so yeah, so I think this is definitely better than Night 2. And it was bookended really by two great matches. I mean, you had Drew McIntyre versus Bobby Lashley in the opening for the WWE title. Believe the only time a WWE Championship was ever opened at WrestleMania. I know the World Heavyweight titles opened 2 WrestleManias. And I think the Universal title did as well, didn't it? WrestleMania 35, I believe. But yeah, the only time the WWE title matches went on first. And it made sense to have a big match like this go on first. Consider it was the first match with fans back in over a year. Yeah, and this was a great big man match actually, to be fair. I mean, these two guys have really good chemistry and I feel like they had a fantastic match here. And that led to the great main event between Sasha Banks versus Bianca Belair for the SmackDown Women's title. Yeah, that was actually a fantastic match. Really enjoyed it a lot. Both women looked really good and made the most of the opportunity. Yeah, it was a great main event. Then you had Bad Bunny and Damian Priest versus Miz and John Morrison. Wow. So like I said earlier when I was talking about LT, people like Bad Bunny have raised the expectation of celebrities over the last couple of years because it shows what they can do. I mean, this was just a really good performance from Bad Bunny. Everyone played the roles well. It was an entertaining match and maybe we'll see Bad Bunny in the WWE ring again. I suspect we will. Cesaro versus Seth Rollins, I think that's a nice gem actually. I mean, really good match. With Cesaro getting probably the biggest win of his career, really, beating Seth Rollins at a WrestleMania. Then Strowman versus Shane wasn't half bad. It was a decent cage match on the night, although I felt the build-up and the storyline behind that match was terrible. But the match was actually pretty good. Then the only really negatives I could really say is AJ and Omos versus New Day. It was an average match. It felt like, felt like more like a Backlash match or something like that. And then the women's gauntlet match to open up the show, which just wasn't particularly good either. So yeah, then come number 18, WrestleMania 33. So I feel like this is a show that's a lot better looking back than it was live. Because I feel like, so this is a point I was going to make, so with 2 night WrestleManias, I feel like if you pick everything on this show and the pre-show and spread it out over 2 nights, this would have came across so much better. I feel like of all the super long WrestleManias that could have been 2 nights, this is probably the one. But you could have had Reigns and Taker main event 1 show, and I don't know, Brock Lesnar versus Goldberg main event in the other one, or even someone like Jericho and Owens getting the main event spot on one of the nights. I think that would have been really good. So I'll say what's good in here is really good, but it does drag a lot. And yeah, just 5 hours watching it live was just like, you just get really tired, don't you? I mean, so the positives really, Seth Rollins versus Triple H. I think this is a great WrestleMania match. I really do. I think a lot of people think this match is quite boring and all that, but I enjoyed it. Thought it was great stuff. I mean, Kevin Owens and Chris Jericho, I think a lot of people don't like this match either. This gets seen as a disappointing match, but I actually enjoyed it. Do I think it could have been better? Absolutely I do. I think it would have been better as a more intense brawl and all that. They could have had a stipulation behind it, but I think that was a good match. Then we got, obviously I think the biggest moment, it would have been the biggest moment if he didn't come back, but the Hardy Boys versus, the Hardy Boys returning after several years away. That was just a huge moment. Then they won the Raw Tag Team titles in a really good ladder match. Then you had, for me, I thought Lesnar Goldberg is one of the most entertaining short matches ever. I mean, it was one of the most unlikely redemption arcs ever, really, if you think about it. If you go back to WrestleMania 20 and they had such a terrible match, and here they are 13 years later, and now they've massively redeemed themselves. I mean, this was nothing much but slam, slam, spear, spear, F5, jackhammer, big move, over in like less than 4 minutes. It was exactly, I remember at the time thinking I wanted to see a more drawn out match, but once I actually saw this play out, I was like, okay, yeah, that's exactly what it should have been. And do you know what? If Goldberg never came back after this, I think like a lot of people would have a much more positive attitude towards Goldberg these days. But yeah, obviously it's hard to turn down Saudi Arabia money, isn't it? I mean, for all of us that want to play the moral high grounds here, you wouldn't do these Saudi shows. If the Saudis threw millions of dollars in your face, would you turn it down? Would you shite? So I can understand why Goldberg took the Saudi Arabia money to have more matches, but as a fan, I just wish this was it for him, because I think it was the perfect way to end his career. Then you had, I think, Undertaker versus Reigns. I feel like this is a match I really overrated at the time. I gave it 3.5 stars, but I think deep down that's because I didn't want to admit that the Undertaker looked so bad in this match. But this was at the very most a 3-star match. But honestly, I would say more likely even less than that, maybe 2.5. If I want to look at it in hindsight. But I do feel like I really overrated this match. I mean, the problem was Undertaker just ran out of energy. I mean, if this match had been 15 minutes at the most, it would have been fine. Because I think like the 10-15 minute mark, you can see Undertaker struggling, and by the end he's just barely keeping up with Roman. And I think this is the night where I think Roman Reigns became a ring general, because up until that point Reigns had good matches, sure, but I don't think at any point he'd been the one carrying the match. Whereas I think in this situation with the Undertaker going down, Reigns had to really take over and make this match. And I feel like if Undertaker retired, it's one of those things. So looking back now, at the time I would have said yes, this absolutely should have been the Undertaker's last match. However, my opinion of this changed when I watched the Last Ride documentary, when I saw how much the Undertaker hated this match and how disgusted he was with his own performance. I'm glad he didn't retire, because I would have just, look, I think the idea of Undertaker retiring unsatisfied and upset of how his last match went, that just wouldn't have sit well with me. So, and now I agree with Undertaker's decision to keep wrestling. But anyway, other good matches, I think the Raw Women's title 4-way was a solid match. AJ versus Shayna was a pretty entertaining match. But then, because of that long show, you had some pretty average stuff as well. I think Cena and Nikki Bella versus Miz and Maurice was probably the lamest WrestleMania match Cena ever had. I mean, good God. I can't, honestly, looking back now, I'm still pissed off they wasted a Cena WrestleMania match on this. And let's face it, the whole thing with Nikki Bella, and then they end up just not getting married and breaking up anyway. So just the whole thing just kind of felt pointless. I mean, the Randy Orton Bray Wyatt match, that just didn't deliver for me. I mean, this match should have been so much better than it was. It was just an average title match at best, to be honest. Then I think the SmackDown Women's match was thrown together last minute. So overall, I would say this was an entertaining night of wrestling. Now coming in number 17, WrestleMania 23. So going back 10 years earlier. This is a WrestleMania I remember at the time not being excited for at all. Because on paper, this just didn't look like a particularly good show. But I feel like it really delivered on the night. I mean, it's definitely based around two excellent title matches. First up, Undertaker versus Batista for the World Heavyweight title. One of the most surprisingly great matches in WrestleMania history. I mean, seriously, I had very little hopes for this match at the time. I was not high for this match whatsoever at the time. I really wasn't. But they went out and they actually had a really awesome match. And then the main event is Shawn Michaels versus John Cena for the WWE title. That was a great match, and maybe the most underrated Shawn Michaels WrestleMania match of all time. Because is it underrated or just forgotten, really? Because I think when you think of Shawn Michaels WrestleMania matches, you think of the ladder match, the Iron Man match, the two Taker matches, maybe even the Kurt Angle match. You don't really think of this one. And then obviously when you think of Shawn and Cena, you'll automatically think of the match you had a month later in London in Raw. That match, because that match was so much better than this one. But this was actually a great match in its own right, and a great main event. Now, the McMahon-Trump Battle of the Billionaires was as good as it needed to be. The Bobby Lashley-Umaga match, this didn't need to be a great match, but it needed to be entertaining and tell a decent story. And we got the payoff. We got to see Vince McMahon get his head shaved bald, which is the main thing. They delivered what they advertised, let's just put it like that. Then you had Money in the Bank ladder match. That was a pretty good opener. Not one of the best Money in the Bank matches, but a good match. And probably Chris Benoit and MVP probably had a nice little gem of a match on this show. Not great, but a good match. But then you had some negatives on there as well. I mean, Kane and Carly was just a bad match. What the hell were you expecting? I mean, Melina and Ashley, similar. A poor match, but what are you expecting? And I think the ECW original versus the New Breed was just an alright match, to be honest. But I think I had a much better match on ECW TV the following Tuesday, but whatever. But overall, WrestleMania 33 was good. Now coming at number 16, WrestleMania 26. I feel like a lot of people might have this WrestleMania a lot higher than me, and that's fine if you do, that's cool. But to me, this is a very good WrestleMania. I would say not quite a great one, because I think there's a couple of really bad matches that drag it down. But I'll say overall, there's quite a bit I like about this show. I mean, this is obviously the Undertaker versus Shawn Michaels main event, the rematch from WrestleMania 25. This was another classic. I don't think it was quite as good as the first one, but it was an awesome match and a great way for Shawn Michaels to end his career. Because Shawn Michaels never wrestled again, did he? Oh, wait, what? Oh, shit, yeah, he wrestled Saudi Arabia, didn't he? Never mind. It was a classic, though. Undertaker, Shawn, awesome match. I feel like John Cena versus Batista had an excellent WWE title match on this show as well. Probably gets underrated a bit, if I'm being honest with you. Probably gets a little bit overlooked, but I think that was a great match. And then undercard, you had some really good stuff there. I mean, I think Chris Jericho versus Edge, probably a slight disappointment. I think I was expecting a lot better from that match. But it was a good match. Not a great one, though, unfortunately. I think the Money in the Bank ladder match was, again, good. Not great. I mean, and Jack Swagger won. Woo. Triple H versus Sheamus. That was interesting, because it was really the first Triple H WrestleMania match since he became a main eventer. Triple H wasn't in one of the really big WrestleMania matches. Though this is Triple H sort of taking a back seat and having a match with Sheamus at this year's WrestleMania. I think that was a good match, but you can tell, like, looking at where Sheamus is now. Sheamus is nowhere near as good then as he is now. But it was a good match though, no real complaints. I think the Punk and Rey Mysterio had a good match for the time it was given. It wasn't a great match, but they made the most of the time they had. Then I think like the legacy triple threat of Randy Orton, Cody Rhodes, Ted DiBiase was fine. It was a decent match, it wasn't great. But then I think these matches dragged this wrestling. So we do have two genuinely terrible matches. I mean, I love I love Brett, but the Brett and Vince match was just objectively garbage. I mean, I understand like it served the purpose of put a ball in Montreal for good, and actually this match actually meant so much to Brett. Actually, this match actually meant a lot to Brett, which is surprising. But yeah, the match wasn't booked well. It was a bad match. Then the 10 women's tag match was just shite as well. And then obviously the opener was just short and to the point of Big Show and Miz versus Morrison and R-Truth. But overall, good stuff. So we're going number 15, WrestleMania 38 Night 1. So now we're in the top 15, and now we're going to last year's at WrestleMania. So while I said mostly negative stuff about WrestleMania 38 Night 2, I thought Night 1 was awesome. Well, not awesome, but really good. I mean, so we have 3 really memorable matches on this show. And yeah, just overall, very entertaining show. I mean, this is always going to be, remember, 2 things really. One, Cody Rhodes returning to WWE after all these years off and having that great match with Seth Rollins. I mean, and look at where Cody is now. Cody's about to main event WrestleMania in a few weeks. And it was this time last year that he was on his way back to WWE after founding AEW and all that crazy stuff. Yeah, it was just a great moment for Cody to come back to WWE, have a great match with Seth Rollins, and here we are. Speaking of returns, arguably one of the biggest returns of all time, Stone Cold Steve Austin coming back to the ring after 19 years away to have a no-holds-barred match with Kevin Owens. And I watched this match a couple of days actually, and it's just an entertaining match. It's not a classic, it was never going to be a classic, but it was just fun. Probably one of the most fun WrestleMania main events of all time, actually, in all fairness. And do you know what, I'll be honest, I hope Austin doesn't come back and have another match. Because I know he was rumoured to be wrestling this year, but obviously that's not going to happen. And you know, with these Salvi shows coming up and down, I'm sure Austin's bound to be offered the chance to return to Saudi Arabia, isn't he? But I'll be honest, I hope he doesn't take it. Because I feel like this was the perfect way to just come back and have one more last fun match. And obviously the other real highlight of this show was Bianca Belair versus Becky Lynch for the Raw Women's title. I mean, this is a great match. I mean, an excellent match with Becky putting Bianca over and Bianca winning the Raw Women's title that she holds this very day. After all the time, she's still the champion. Then you have a couple more good things. I mean, Ronda versus Charlotte, that was a disappointing match, but it wasn't terrible. It wasn't a terrible match. I mean, we've seen much worse Ronda Rousey matches last year. But I do think the I Quit match that these women had a Backlash was better than this. Well, it was Backlash, wasn't it? I think it was. Yeah, well, I'm sure it was Backlash. But they had a much better I Quit match. But this match was fine. It was okay. Then I think, obviously, now looking back in hindsight, the start of Logan Paul was Logan Paul and The Miz versus the Mysterios. I mean, my God. I think at the time we thought this was a one-off, but looking where we are with Logan Paul now, the start of it, I'll be honest, I find the Paul brothers annoying little twats, but I can't deny that they're very talented, and Logan Paul, certainly very talented, and this is a fun match. So the only real negatives were the first 2 matches, and neither match was really terrible. They had the Usos versus Nakamura and Rick Boogs, not Boobs. It was an average. I think obviously the match got spoiled because Boogs got injured early on and all that, but match was fine. Then I think the other one, Baron Corbin versus Drew McIntyre. This just felt like, what is Drew McIntyre doing here? And this is what you got for Drew McIntyre at WrestleMania sort of thing. But overall, a very entertaining show. Now coming in number 14, WrestleMania 22. But yeah, this was just overall quite a consistently good show. There was a lot of good stuff on here. I think this WrestleMania was lacking that extra something. Either that truly classic WrestleMania match or that really huge marquee WrestleMania match. So the matches on this show, there was a couple of big matches on this show, but nothing like huge. And again, in ring, nothing was outstanding. And I think if one of those things happened, this would be in the much higher tier than it is. But I think overall, consistently, it's pretty damn good. I mean, obviously the highlight for me is Edge and Mick Foley's hardcore match. That was a really good match. I mean, both guys looked awesome in that one and had a tremendous finish as well. But then the good stuff, I mean, you had Triple H versus John Cena main event. Now, this is probably a slightly overrated WrestleMania main event, because I feel like WWE likes to push this as a classic WrestleMania main event because the two big stars are Cena and Triple H. But in reality, it was a very fine, a very good main event. Nothing... I think it would have been a lot better later on, because Cena still wasn't the guy in the ring that he would eventually become. But it was a very good main event, and a big step towards putting Cena over as a new guy. Then I think the Money in the Bank match was really good as well. That was a really good match. Then you also had the World Heavyweight title match. That was just... I can't believe that match only got 9 minutes. I know it's like 17 years ago, but still, that's just really annoying. I mean, given twice as long, that match probably would have been awesome in fairness. Then you had Benoit versus JBL, that was good. Shawn Michaels versus Vince McMahon, that was entertaining. It was kind of like Shawn Mr. WrestleMania having the WrestleMania off. He wasn't expected to steal the show on this night, but he had a good match with Vince. And Trish Stratus versus Mickie James was really good. Then the rest of the show, you had Kane Big Show versus Carlito and Chris Masters. Meh. Undertaker versus Mark Henry, and probably one of the least memorable streak matches of all time. It wasn't terrible, but it was just kind of there. Then Candice versus Tori and Boogeyman versus Booker T and Sharmell were both bad matches. And then coming number 13, WrestleMania 7. This was just a fun show. I mean, this was just a really fun show, a really entertaining show. But like a lot of WrestleMania from this era, it was so like, you had good, you had bad, you had terrible as well. So, yeah, so obviously the big highlight has to be Ultimate Warrior versus Macho Man Randy Savage in a career-ending match, and that, of course, led to... Yeah, that match was just a classic. I mean, it really was. It's a great story told, a great WrestleMania match. And that obviously culminated in the epic moment of Macho Man and Elizabeth reunited at the end of the match. Just a wonderful moment, really, let's be fair. And I think also other highlights in the show. I mean, this was the start of the streak. I mean, obviously the match between Taker and Snuka was what it was. It wasn't a brilliant match by any means, but it was the one. If Undertaker didn't win this match, we wouldn't have had 21-0 epic streak, would we? Then you obviously have Rockers versus Barbarian Haku. Probably one of the most underrated WrestleMania openers of all time. I mean, this was just a really good big team versus little team match. Nothing fancy, but it was a really good match. I feel like another end of an era is the Hart Foundation dropped the tag team titles to the Nasty Boys in what was a really good tag team match, and the end of the Hart Foundation and the start of Bret Hart becoming a star. But then I think Hogan versus Slaughter, I've seen a lot of people trash this main event. A lot of people do not like this match at all. I mean, I've actually seen a lot of people have it in the worst WrestleMania main event lists. But no, I don't think so. I mean, objectively, the storyline was not very good. Obviously, massively distasteful to exploit a war like they did. But I think the match was good. I mean, it was a good, logical story. Got a lot of time. It wasn't one of Hogan's best WrestleMania matches, but I think it was a good 3-star level match. I really do. And on this night, Hulk Hogan became the first third-time WWF champion. And you had a couple of entertaining matches on there as well. The blindfold match between Jake Roberts and Rick Martel. Not a classic or anything like that, but super fun. This was just probably one of the very few times the blindfold stipulation actually worked. Then you got the British Bulldog versus the Warlord. That was a really solid match. Nothing to write home about, but a pretty solid match in itself. Then Big Boss Man, Mr. Perfect. That was a pretty good Intercontinental title match. So then the rest ranges from average to bad. Then you got Texas Tornado versus Dino Bravo. Because I think some of the undercard just wasn't very good. Legion of Doom, Squash Power and Glory. Earthquake versus Greg Valentine. Tito Santana versus the Mountie was pretty bad. And probably Ted DiBiase versus Virgil was disappointing as well. So yeah, now coming in number 12, WrestleMania 35. So yeah, I think of the super long WrestleManias, this one was definitely the best. And like I said, there's some bad stuff on here, but I think what's good is really good. I mean, obviously I think the highlight has to be Daniel Bryan and Kofi Kingston for the WWE title. That was a genuine WrestleMania classic. The whole Kofi Mania story was a great one, and fans wanted one thing that night: for Kofi Kingston to beat Daniel Bryan to become the new WWE champion, and that's exactly what they got. So they got exactly what they wanted. Daniel Bryan put on an awesome performance to put Kofi Kingston over strong. And yeah, overall, just a fantastic match. I don't think there's been a better WrestleMania title match since then. It's just, yeah, and it was in the middle of the show as well, so the crowd was still with it, which is, then we'll go to the main event. So I think if you just look at it on its own, it's actually, yeah, I think this main event, Charlotte Flair versus Ronda Rousey, Becky Lynch, was actually a borderline great match. But I think the problem was, by the time this match started, the show was running so long, fans were so knackered that the fans just weren't that into it. And I feel like this match would have been much better as a main event of a 2-night WrestleMania, wouldn't it, really? So I think like if it was like the end of a 3-hour show, fans would be with it, but the fans weren't that with it. But if you watch this match in isolation, looking back, it's actually a really good to great match. It really is. I didn't really like the finish too much, but thought the match itself, no real complaints there. Then of course also you had Seth Rollins beating Brock Lesnar decisively in the opening match. I mean, this is a great way to open up the show. Have a huge title match to open up the show. Have a big shock result. Now this is my takeaway for this show. The WWE gave the fans 3 big feel good moments. Kofi winning the title, Becky Lynch overcoming the odds, and Seth Rollins defeating Brock Lesnar for the Universal title. But there's more good stuff on this show. I mean, I thought Triple H versus Batista was really good. Now, I know a lot of people aren't going to like this because they're going to find it slow and boring. I mean, yes, granted, I think like this match probably should have been shorter, but Triple H has to have his long matches at WrestleMania because he does. Because Triple H wants to have long matches at WrestleMania. Triple H is going to have long matches at WrestleMania. End of story. I actually feel like this was better than the WrestleMania 21 match, which we'll get to in a little bit. And it was a really great way for Batista to end his career, quite frankly, to be honest. And then we had the SmackDown Tag Team title Fatal 4-Way. It was actually a hell of a gem. Probably an underrated WrestleMania gem, in fairness. Randy Orton versus AJ Styles. Do feel like this could have been better. I mean, there's definitely a feeling this match could have reached a higher level, but overall it was a very entertaining match. Then we got Miz versus Shane McMahon again. This was fine. I think in hindsight, Miz should have absolutely won. Because I think the big problem with this is, at no point after this did Miz actually get any kind of revenge on Shane, and that just kind of ruined the Miz as a babyface. Then you had Roman Reigns making his return from leukemia to face Drew McIntyre, and this was a fine match. Yeah, I think the problem, it was just a good solid match. It wasn't anything to write home about. And then the negatives, it's going to be Angle versus Corbin. I mean, that was just obviously Kurt Angle had to retire because he was just so knackered, but it was just someone that had such a career that Kurt Angle did. To this day, I just kind of feel sad that this was his retirement. I mean, the match wasn't very good, and it just felt like a really cold retirement for such a legend like Kurt Angle. I mean, yeah, it's just, and obviously Samoa Joe and Rey Mysterio was a few seconds because Rey Mysterio was injured, and then the only really, yeah, there was Bobby Lashley versus Finn Balor, and then the women's tag match were both just alright. So, okay, so coming number 11, this one, I'm not sure how people can react to this one, being only 11, but WrestleMania 20. I mean, I can imagine some people have this a lot higher, but for me, there's just too much filler. I think what stands out for me is what is good on this show is really great, but there's just too much filler. I mean, if you cut out some of the filler, I think you would have had a genuinely amazing WrestleMania. the great stuff, obviously. In the main event, Benoit versus Shawn Michaels versus Triple H. The WrestleMania main event, people don't want you to celebrate, but we do celebrate it because it was a fucking great match. And then Chris Benoit won the World Heavyweight title at the end. Then they had that big moment for him and Eddie Guerrero, which is just sad how badly that's aged now, but God, just at the time, just amazing. Then for me, Kurt Angle versus Eddie Guerrero had an awesome WWE title. Honestly, swear to God, that WWE title match was friggin' fantastic. Really was. Loved that match. But then I think you had two genuinely good moments on this show. I mean, obvious one, the Dead Man returning after all few years as the American Badass, and the classic Undertaker returned. Now, grant the match of Kane wasn't particularly... No, it was pretty bad. It wasn't, I'll take that back, it wasn't terrible, but it wasn't very good either. Then I think a big moment in Cena's career, Cena becoming the US champion in the opener. That was the start of John Cena's rise to the top. I mean, the match with the Big Show was average, but the moment was cool. I think the Rock and Sock Connection versus Evolution was great. Oh, that was a great match, actually. I actually enjoyed the hell out of the match. I thought it was very, very entertaining stuff. Then you also had a nice gem on the show of Chris Jericho versus Christian. That was a really good WrestleMania match with a great turn. But this is what drags this WrestleMania down. Just like I said, too much filler. So you had two fatal four-way tag team title matches for the World Tag Titles and the WWE Tag Title matches. I mean, did either of those matches need to happen on this show? Especially the SmackDown one. That didn't need to happen, did it? And it just felt really lazy to really have two four-way tag matches. This is blatantly, okay, yeah, just get these guys on the show, whatever. Molly Holly versus Victoria for the women's title versus hair match was not particularly good. It wasn't terrible, but definitely below average. Then the Cruiserweight opener. This was another... just get all these guys on the show. I mean, it was just a bit of a mess, really, because you had like 10 guys in there and you had like less than 10 minutes and you had to rush through all these eliminations. I feel like if you just had Chavo versus Rey Mysterio, or maybe a triple threat match or something like Tajiri or Ultimo Dragon, it would have came across just a lot better. And then Lesnar versus Goldberg. They had a really good match at WrestleMania 33. But the WrestleMania 20 match, probably one of the worst WrestleMania matches of all time. I mean, it was just that bad. And then the Playboy tag team match was what it was. Yeah, whatever. Now we're at the top 10. So we've got this far, an hour and a half into the video. So I probably went longer than I was expecting to. But so thank you guys for watching so far. Now we've got 10 more WrestleManias to go. So these are all great WrestleManias, and for me, they all deserve to be in here. Coming in number 10, WrestleMania 21. This was so close to being one of the absolute best WrestleManias of all time. But I do think this is a generally excellent show. I mean, a 7-match card, which I actually appreciated, because I feel like WWE weren't just shoving stuff on this show for the sake of it. Near enough everything had a purpose. And of course, obviously the highlight has to be Angle versus Michaels. One of the great... Kurt Angle, Shawn Michaels, a true WrestleMania clinic. As far as just a wrestling match, this is definitely one of the best wrestling matches in WrestleMania history. I mean, for me, this was a massive dream match at the time that I was finally seeing come true, and I was just so excited for it. I really was. Just, wow, what a great match. It really was. But for me, what stands out about this WrestleMania as well, this felt like the last WrestleMania where the big goal was to create new stars. Because I think later on, WrestleMania, it became all about the veterans, the part-timers coming back to have big WrestleMania matches. But this WrestleMania is memorable for me for the rise of John Cena and Batista becoming World Heavyweight and WWE champions. I mean, for Batista beating Triple H in the main event for the world title, Cena beating JBL for the WWE title. I mean, I feel like, because I think both matches were average to just pretty good. I feel like if both of these title matches were very good to great, that probably would have bumped this WrestleMania up to a much higher level. But yeah, I just feel like obviously The Attitude Era had been gone for a while, but well into Ruthless Aggression. WWE needed new stars, and they picked Cena and Batista, and this WrestleMania was their platform to make it. So more highlights on this show has to be, though, the first Money in the Bank ladder match between Edge, Benoit, Jericho, Christian, Shelton, Benjamin and Kane. For me, still the best ladder match in Money in the Bank ladder match in WrestleMania history. Thought this was a great match, I really did. Awesome. Then Undertaker becomes 13-0 as he beats Randy Orton. This is a really good match as well. Probably one of the more underrated Undertaker WrestleMania matches. And this show actually was a great use of three legends actually at WrestleMania. First up, Hulk Hogan, instead of having a match, taking a spot from a younger guy, they did a segment where Hulk Hogan saved Eugene from Muhammad Hassan and just had a really nice moment in the ring. That was really good. Then the Steve Austin Roddy Piper's pit segment, one of the better non-wrestling segments in WrestleMania history. I mean, I feel like this was a hell of a lot better than the WrestleMania 5 Piper's pit, but it was a really nice use of Austin and Piper on this show. Then, like I say, Triple H and Batista was match was good, not great. Eddie Guerrero versus Rey Mysterio, that was a disappointing opener. It was a good match, but we've seen these two guys are capable of so much better. I mean, really the only real negative I can say, really, is the Trish Stratus Christy Hemme women's title match. But even that match wasn't the worst. I mean, obviously I've seen much worse women's matches in WWE history before or after this. But it wasn't a good match at all, was it really? But it was what it was. Now, coming number 9, WrestleMania 28. I mean, for me, I think that WrestleMania is really underappreciated. Honestly, I remember at the time people giving negative reviews of this show, but I think it was just people wanting to be negative. I mean, for me, this was a huge WrestleMania. As a matter of fact, the highest pay-per-view number WrestleMania ever did, and obviously ever will do, because we don't have traditional pay-per-view like that anymore. It's more Peacock Network subscriptions now. But yeah, so what I appreciate about this WrestleMania is this was based around 3 big matches, and they all delivered in their own way. So main event, Cena versus Rock, once in a lifetime. Once in a lifetime, I right. But yeah, honestly, like, this match was genuinely huge, and I think this is probably going to be the last mega match in wrestling history, because one, I don't think anything can beat The Rock coming back. I mean, if Cena comes back for a big match, that's not going to be as big as The Rock coming back in 2011, 2012, and there's no one on the roster as big as Cena was back then. So yeah, because I feel like they don't have stars like this anymore. But this was a genuine dream match, and I think this match was awesome. I loved this match. I thought the build of this match was great as well. It's just a shame they didn't do it. Honestly, I know it's a long time ago, but I just wish they'd had this match and left it at that. They didn't do it at WrestleMania 29, because I feel like this just would have been great on its own. And then, for me, the best match of the show, and one of the best WrestleMania matches ever, Undertaker versus Triple H, Hell in a Cell. End of an era, Shawn Michaels guest referee, the end of the big 4-year arc that started at WrestleMania 25, went all the way through here. This was a classic, an absolute classic, just an amazing match, amazing story being told, and that was it. End of an era. Triple H, Shawn Michaels, Undertaker had this match, never interacted with each other after this in a wrestling environment, did they not? Okay, only till 2018, but still, it was a great moment. And somehow, because I think about this, what would have been the perfect time for The Undertaker to call it a day? And this might have been it, you know. Going 20-0 at WrestleMania, having a 5-star match with Triple H at the end of a big story, that probably would have been the ideal ending. The other one, CM Punk versus Chris Jericho for the WWE title. This was a great match as well. Not a classic or anything like that, but I think it was a great title match. And then the rest of the show, admittedly, is fairly average. I mean, you had Orton versus Kane. That was fine. Wasn't bad. I mean, the Team Teddy versus Team Johnny match was, again, fine. Nothing amazing or anything like that. It was alright. Then you had Cody Rhodes versus The Big Show. That's what it was. Then Sheamus squashing Daniel Bryan in 18 seconds. Still one of the most talked about booking decisions in WrestleMania history. But yeah, overall it's a great show. Now coming in number 8, WrestleMania 31. So this was the last one night WrestleMania to be 4 hours long. And I would say this was just a very, very consistent show. I mean, there's not many negatives to say about this show, really. Although nothing was truly amazing on this show, I don't think. Most of it was very good. Pretty much everything was very good to great, apart from maybe one or two things. So let's look at it. So main event, Lesnar versus Reigns. The first Lesnar versus Reigns WrestleMania match. Yeah, this was... So for me, Lesnar and Reigns have had so many matches. They've only really ever had 2 great matches. This one here and the last match that they had at SummerSlam last year. But yeah, this match delivered more than we were expecting. And this obviously, of course, culminated in Seth Rollins cashing his Money in the Bank briefcase to become WWE Champion, making it a triple threat match. Yeah, probably one of the best WrestleMania moments of the last decade for sure. Just an awesome moment, and this was a great match as well. I think the ladder match opener, that was excellent between for the Intercontinental title. It was a great way to open up the show. And then Randy Orton versus Seth Rollins again. A great that was the second match of the show, wasn't it? That was a genuinely fantastic match as well. Really was. Great stuff. And then you had Triple H versus Sting. Look, it should have been Taker and Sting, right? Should have been, but we're not gonna. But we did get a good match. But I think a lot of people hate on Sting's WWE run. I think this match was terrible. I enjoyed it. I think it was a fun nostalgia ride with the NWO and DX getting involved and all that, and it was fun. And at least we got Sting at WrestleMania. It wasn't the match we wanted, but at least Sting got at least one WrestleMania match in his career, and it was a fun match. And yes, Sting should have went over, but that's another issue. Then we got the Ronda Rousey Rock Triple H Stephanie segment. That was good, not great. That could have been better, could have been shorter, but it was good. I mean, Cena versus Rusev, I think that was a solid match. I don't think it was anything to write home about, but it was a solid match. Undertaker coming back after losing the streak to face Bray Wyatt. That was a decent match, but just a decent match in my opinion. And the only real down, but even the AJ Lee and Page against the Bells match wasn't terrible. Granted, it certainly wasn't great or anything, but it definitely wasn't terrible. So there's that. Then number 7, WrestleMania 30. I mean, a lot of younger people might have this in the top 2 or 3, but for me, number 7's a good spot for it to be on. I mean, this is one of the most memorable WrestleManias of all time. Just a real emotional roller coaster, wasn't it? And it was the first WrestleMania of the network. In fact, the first pay-per-view on the network, period. So I feel like because of that, WWE had to deliver a blockbuster show. And of course, this was just a time where WWE was actively fighting with the audience over a lot of things, over the booking and all that sort of stuff. I mean, this is memorable for a few reasons. I mean, reason number 1, this is all about Daniel Bryan's story. I mean, Daniel Bryan, first he beat Triple H in that was an amazing opening match. Honestly, that was just a friggin' fantastic WrestleMania opener. Probably the second best WrestleMania opener of all time. I think you all know what number 1 is, obviously. But this is a great match as well. I mean, that led to obviously Bryan then beating Randy Orton and Batista in a triple threat match in the main event. Now, this wasn't one of the best WrestleMania main events of all time, but it was a great one. I would probably say I still stand by my 4-star rating I gave it back in 2014. I think that one's more than fair, so I'm going to stick with that star rating. I think that's fair. And that obviously the end of Bryan becoming the champion. And then the streak end on this night. They say what you want, whether you think it was a great decision, whether you think it was a bad decision. It's one of the most memorable moments in WWE history. Something we thought we'd never see. Brock Lesnar hits that third F5. 1, 2, 3. the world, everyone was shocked at that. Everyone was stunned at that. I mean, I personally would not have done it. For me, I would have happily just let The Undertaker keep the streak till he retired. But that's what they did. Lesnar broke the streak. It is what it is. And the match itself, I think this match is a little bit overhated. Yeah, a lot of people don't like this match. But I think it's a good match. I think it's a deep, good, solid brawl. But it's certainly not Undertaker's best WrestleMania matches. But that doesn't really matter. Or the only thing that anyone really remembers is the ending. Then what else? We got some. Then I'll say the opening segment between Hogan, Austin, Rock. Love that segment. That is such a fantastic. The three biggest icons in WWE history having a really cool opening segment. Then I think Cena Wyatt was a borderline great match as well. Actually, it was a quite slow pace, so I feel like a lot of people aren't going to love this match. But I enjoyed it. I thought it was good stuff. Then I'll say a couple more good stuff. The Andre Battle Royal, the Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal, the first one was a good Battle Royal. For what it's worth, I guess the best Battle Royal in WrestleMania history, for what it's worth, although that's not really saying much at all, to be fair. But yeah, I enjoyed it with Cesaro winning, and I feel like the Shield squashing Kane the New Age Outlaws, that was really well done. Should we have got a better Shield match? Yes, I absolutely do feel like. But what I do appreciate is this time WWE let the young guys squash the Attitude Era veterans, which is how it should have went. Because so many times it's Attitude Era legends squashing the young guys. Voice is going a bit here. And that's just not the way to go. I mean, the only real negative for me is the Vicky Guerrero Divas Invitational match. That was just But that was an impossible spot really, because it was after the streak ended and before the main event. So that was really the death spot. Now, number 6, WrestleMania 14. One of the most important WrestleManias of all time, I feel, because this was when the WWF was on the verge of coming back against WCW. They had Mike Tyson, so they had a lot of eyeballs watching the product. So for me, they needed to knock it out of the park with this show, and for me, they absolutely did. I mean, overall, this is just a consistently very good to great show. I mean, there's just so many memorable stuff. I mean, the big main event, Steve Austin versus Shawn Michaels, Mike Tyson, the guest enforcer. One of the biggest WrestleMania matches of all time, it has to be, doesn't it? I mean, yeah, God. And it's a miracle this match was as good as it was, if Shawn Michaels come to this match with a major back injury, and Stone Cold not being too far removed from being dropping his head at SummerSlam. So I just feel like if Austin and Michaels were both 100%, this probably would have been one of the best WrestleMania main events of all time. But I think it was a great one though. I really enjoyed the match. And it looked like that was it for Shawn Michaels, but it wasn't, obviously. And yeah, that's just a huge moment of Stone Cold being coronated as a new WWF champion. And Jim Ross's call, the Austin era has begun. And it certainly had, and it was a great era. And then we had, I think honestly, most of the undercard was very good. So you had Undertaker versus Kane at that point, the hottest streak match. One of the best built-up streak matches as well. And for me, easily the best Undertaker versus Kane match, because let's face it, after this match, the matches just were what they were. But yeah, this was a really fun match and a memorable match as well. Now, a couple of gems really, like with Triple H and Owen Hart, that was a hell of a WrestleMania gem. I really enjoy that match a lot. I feel like it's a really, really, really good match. They had the dumpster match between Cactus Jack and Chainsaw Charlie versus the New Age Outlaws. That was just Attitude Era brawl, hardcore fun. Wasn't meant to be an awesome match, but it was just a really, really fun match. Yeah, I really, really enjoyed that match. And I'll say the mixed tag team match was much better than had any right to be. Sable and Mark Mero versus Goldust and Luna. Because here that was Sable's first ever match. He did a really, really good job of hiding the flaws and having an entertaining match. And I feel like for a 5-minute match, the light heavyweight title match between Taka Michinoku and Ogula was actually really entertaining. Really, yeah, I enjoyed that match quite a bit. The only two negatives are really the opening Battle Royal, 15-team Battle Royal. That was just a classic, get all these guys on the show. It just didn't really serve much purpose other than that. Then the Rock Shamrock match as well. I still don't understand why this match was so short. As far as I can tell, nobody was injured. It just, for some reason, this match got really dicked for time, and it's a real shame. And they did another dusty finish as well. So now we're in the top 5. So all these WrestleManias are all-timers, and I'm sure a lot of you guys have the same WrestleManias but in different order. So let's go. Number 5, WrestleMania 24. God, this was, I can't believe this was 15 years ago now. It doesn't feel like this show happened 15 years ago, but yeah, I think this WrestleMania is awesome. And fantastic show from start to finish. There's not that many negatives. There's a couple of negatives, but not many. But I feel like there's some really great stuff. I mean, the main event, Undertaker versus Edge, that was an excellent WrestleMania main event. A really well worked match. Because this was right before the Triple H Shawn Michaels series, so probably gets a little bit overlooked in Undertaker streak matches because of that. But it was Edge's first WrestleMania main event. And Undertaker's second WrestleMania main event, I believe, because he did it at WrestleMania 13, didn't he? But yeah, honestly, I thought this is a cracking match. Really was fantastic match. Then obviously Shawn Michaels, Ric Flair, career-threatening match. This was the highlight of the show for me. Just such an emotional match. Probably the most emotional WrestleMania match of all time. Just the storytelling was unbelievable in this match as well. And the whole end of them, I'm sorry, I love you. Super kick, Shawn wins. Wow, what a moment. And yeah, it's unfortunate there wasn't Ric Flair's last match. But you know, it is what it is. I'm over it now. It was 15 years ago. Let's get over it. But yeah, the match was awesome. Also, 2 cracking matches. I thought Cena versus Orton versus Triple H for the WWE title was excellent. Love this match. Great stuff. I think the Money in the Bank match was fantastic as well, with CM Punk becoming the Money in the Bank ladder match winner. Yeah, that was a great Money in the Bank. Then you had a good match between Big Show and Mayweather. Now, yeah, this was just a really fun novelty match, with a massive Big Show facing a small Mayweather, and obviously Mayweather being a big time boxer at the time. I mean, yeah, but yeah, I really like this match. I think at the time it was probably the best celebrity match at WrestleMania, or the best received one anyway. Because like I said earlier, I feel like expectations for these kind of matches have gone up over the last couple of years. But this was just as good as it could have been, really. They had JBL versus Finlay in a nice hard-hitting opener, a Belfast brawl. Because Finlay's from Belfast, so we're having a Belfast brawl, even though it's really just a hardcore match. But yeah, fun opener. Then I feel like also Kane versus Chavo was a kind of a cool squash for the ECW title. The only negatives really is Batista versus Umaga. This just did not feel like a WrestleMania match. It was a thrown together match. It wasn't very important, and it just wasn't there. And then the Playboy Bunny tag team match was just what it was. Was it Melina and Beth against Maria and Ashley? Yeah, that was what it was, wasn't it, really? Now, coming in number 4, for me, I think a lot of people won't have this one anywhere near this high, but it's my list, so it is what it is. WrestleMania 10. I love this show. This is just nostalgia and personified for me. Because my first WrestleMania was WrestleMania 9, and that wasn't a particularly good WrestleMania. But a year later, they would give us an amazing WrestleMania. I think most people... So I'm willing to admit I'm probably overrating this show. I'll outright just say, yes, I am probably overrating this show. I'll admit that, but I love this show, and it does have 2 of the absolute best WrestleMania matches ever. I mean, first up, Bret versus Orton. Wow. Just unbelievable main event. Honestly, I can't believe this show's nearly 29 years old now. It's just balmy to think like that's how long ago this show was, 29 years. But wow, what a way to open up the show. Bret and Orton having an absolute classic match. Love this match. Great stuff. Then that of course led to later in the night, Bret defeating Yokozuna to become the WWF champion. The Bret Yoko match was what it was. It was a good WrestleMania main event. Nothing to write home about. But I think it was an epic moment really of Bret kind of Bret getting redemption for what happened to him at WrestleMania 9, and becoming the WWF champion again at WrestleMania 10, and this time all the babyfaces endorsing Bret. So this was like, really, okay, Bret, here's your moment, you're the guy now, you're the champion. And that wonderful moment at the end where all the babyfaces have Bret on the shoulder, Owen Hart comes out, his face is like, why? So it's all about you, what about me? So Owen had beaten Bret in the opener, but the WrestleMania ending still was all about Bret, and that you could tell us, it ate Owen alive that, again, Bret was stealing Owen's moment again. I was like, why? But for me, this WrestleMania is probably most remembered for the first televised ladder match between Shawn Michaels and Razor Ramon. Oh, so much nostalgia for that. I mean, when I watched that match for the first time when it happened when I was a kid, just totally blown away by that match. I mean, that was just, for me, it still holds up. I can understand why some people don't love that match as much, because they didn't see it at the time. They've seen all the crazy epic ladder matches we had years later. So it's not as crazy athletic as some of the later ladder matches. But I feel like this tells a better story. What I love is they don't go, because obviously these days you have ladder matches. There's ladder matches all over the ring. But these actually worked for like a good 5-10 minutes before getting the ladder. So it was actually a struggle in itself to get the ladder to begin with. And I think that's kind of what gets lost in modern ladder matches. But this was great. So obviously, to some more, I mean, Savage and Crush, this is a really overhated match. But I feel like it's a hell of a fun false count anyway. I think the stipulation of having 60 seconds to get back in the ring is a bit weird, but yeah, the match was really good. And I think also cool, we had 2 special guest referees for the title matches, and what was it, Lex Luger and Mr. Perfect and Roddy Piper. Now I think the rest of the show is from average to bad. I feel like the Yoko Luger title match is just terrible, let's be fair. The match isn't good at all. Earthquake squashing Adam Bomb, that was what it was. Londra Blaze versus Leilani Kai just wasn't very good. And also Men on a Mission versus, that was a decent match, Men on a Mission versus Quebecers. And also Bam Bam Bigelow and Luna versus Doink and Dink was what it was. But overall, just such a memorable WrestleMania. And now, ironically enough, coming at number 3 is WrestleMania 3. So the only WrestleMania on this list which is a match to the number of ranking, WrestleMania 3. Now, I could see a lot of people having a different opinion. I could see a lot of older fans having this as their best WrestleMania of all time. On the other end of the spectrum, I can see a lot of younger fans having this one much lower than when I've got it on. But I feel like, in terms of spectacle, in terms of historical importance, this has to be in the upper tier of WrestleManias. Now, as an in-ring wrestling show, nothing really to write home about overall, but I think people don't understand that this show is the one that made WrestleMania what it is today. Because I think people take for granted WrestleMania these days is going to sell out no matter what. Because the WrestleMania brand is big enough that it can sell out on its own. Whereas in this situation, this show sold those 93,000 tickets, or however, whatever the real number was. Well, that's going to be debated for the rest of the time. But I think this kind of is one of the most defining pay-per-views in WWF history. For me, this was the peak of the 80s boom. I mean, that 80s boom started in 84. I think it all culminated in this one mega. I think this started the real concept of WrestleMania being a mega show. I mean, yes, there are some bad stuff on here, but what's great is great. I mean, it's obviously going to be remembered for 2 main reasons, really. One, the big showdown between Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant. For me, it'll always be the biggest WrestleMania match of all time. It'll always be the biggest match of all time, period. As a match, in-ring action, not particularly great. I mean, Andre was in pretty bad health at this time. But as an overall spectacle, just huge match. And what I did like, actually, is the match went 12 minutes. It didn't overstay its welcome, and it told a logical story. So the actual concept of the match was fine, and this was all built around a huge finish of Hogan body slamming Andre the Giant, beating the Giant, and that gave Hogan a massive win. And then, of course, Macho Man, Randy Savage, Ricky Steamboat, a timeless classic. Still to this day, how many years is it now? 36? Yeah, 36. One of the best WrestleMania matches of all time. It was a classic match. It was a great match in 1987. It's a great match in 2023. It's always going to be an awesome match. And I mean, these two matches, Hogan, Andre, Savage, Steamboat. If you only watch two matches from the 80s WWF, these are the two you've got to watch. Because the sad truth about a lot of 80s wrestling, it doesn't hold up today. But this Savage Steamboat match absolutely does. Just an absolute epic match it really was, with Steamboat beating Savage. But that wasn't the only good thing on this show. I mean, you had Roddy Piper's retirement. So this is Piper's first retirement of roughly about 220 retirements Piper had in his career. But because Piper beat Adrian Adonis in a hair versus hair match. And then Piper was going to retire to become a movie star. He did back in 89. His retirement did last 2 years, which I suppose is a relatively long time as far as wrestling retirements go. But yeah, Piper and Adonis had a really good match. But I think a lot of the undercard was actually pretty good as well. And it doesn't get enough credit, really. Feel like what are you looking at? Yeah, the Hart Foundation and Danny Davis versus Bulldogs and Tito Santana. That was a nice gem of a match. Honky Tonk Man versus Jake Roberts. That was a pretty good match. Can-On Connection versus Don Morocco and Bob Orton. And the rest of it was pretty average. I mean, there's only a couple of really bad matches. But even stuff like Billy Jack Haynes versus Hercules was a perfectly decent match. Sheik and Volkov versus the Killer Bees was fine. The Rougeaus versus the Dream Team was pretty decent. The only real bad stuff, I think Harley Race versus JYD wasn't very good. And the Little Person 6-man tag match wasn't very good. I nearly said an offensive word there, but I stopped myself. But yeah, so overall, WrestleMania 3 is a classic. Now, coming in number 2. Now, I imagine majority of people have these two WrestleManias as your top 2. But you might have a different order. So for me, number 2, WrestleMania 19. 20 years ago, which is freaking crazy to think about. This show's nearly 20 years old now. But God, yeah, this is just such a great wrestling show. Perhaps as an out-and-out wrestling show, this might be the best WrestleMania of all time as far as purely from a match perspective, I would say. But both of these shows are amazing. I mean, 2003, this just probably one of the most star-studded WrestleManias as well. I mean, so many icons on the same show. I mean, so obviously you have 3 big matches. What I think is interesting about this show is any of the top 3 matches could have theoretically main evented this show. So Angle and Lesnar was the match that did go on last, and it was a great match, but also, God, it was just a scary match as well, because Kurt Angle went in that match with a broken freaking neck. And I just feel like these days, not a chance WWE would have let Kurt Angle do this match. They would have insisted on not getting his neck surgery right away, but Angle took the risk, and it was what it was. But this match is also memorable for Brock Lesnar nearly breaking his neck when he botched his shooting star press. I mean, honestly, seriously, sort of feel like Brock Lesnar's the only guy that could have happened to, and it wouldn't have broke his neck. Because obviously Brock Lesnar's such a physical specimen, has such a huge, thick, powerful neck. I think that's the only reason that Brock Lesnar didn't break his neck that night. He just fucked himself up even more. It was a great main event. Then you had the final chapter of the Austin Rock saga. This is the 3rd WrestleMania match. And what we thought at the time was going to be Austin's last ever match. And it was for 19 years. Now, I would say this is probably the worst of the 3 Austin Rock WrestleMania matches. But it was still an entertaining match. I think it was a borderline great match. And it just a great way to put a bow on Austin's career, putting over his biggest rival, The Rock, clean in the middle of the ring at WrestleMania when Austin had beaten The Rock 2 previous times. Then you had Hogan vs McMahon street fight. This was so much better than it had any right to be. I mean, this was 2 old guys in a match. This was never going to be Savage versus Steamboat or Kurt Angle versus Shawn Michaels or Okada versus Omega, was it? It wasn't going to be that. It was the street fight, and It was entertaining as hell. It was a bloodbath. It was a battle. He even had a cool moment with Roddy Piper returning to this one. This was probably about as entertaining as it could have really been. But for me, the show stealer, Shawn Michaels, Chris Jericho. Shawn Michaels coming back to WrestleMania after 5 years away. And he stole the show in his first WrestleMania back with Chris Jericho. Wow, classic match. And I think the undercard is really good as well. I mean, you had they had the SmackDown Tag Team title freeway, Team Angle versus Benoit and Rhino versus Los Guerreros, good match. The women's title match, Trish Stratus versus Victoria versus Jazz, good match. Matt Hardy versus Rey Mysterio, a good opener. I mean, the only real even Big Show and A-Train versus The Undertaker was a fine match. I mean, yeah, that match was fine. It was pretty decent. I didn't like Triple H Booker T. I just didn't. It was a sound enough wrestling match, but obviously we all hated Triple H going over Booker T that night. And the only other bad thing really, that Miller Lite Cat Girl fight segment or whatever the fuck you want, Miller Lite Girls cat fight segment that they put on the show at last minute. I mean, they bumped Kane and RVD versus Lance Storm and Cheeks Morley to Sunday Night Heat to do this match. And it's just a massive shame. You know what I mean? So yeah, so there you go. And obviously, no surprise to anyone, number one, WrestleMania 17. This for me is the greatest WrestleMania of all time. I mean, even if you don't think it's the greatest WrestleMania of all time, surely nobody has a lower than 3 to 5, right? I mean, there's no way this... If it's not the best WrestleMania of all time, it has to be at least one of them. And yeah, for me, just the peak of wrestling in the United States. I mean, 20 odd years later, just so much nostalgia for this show. I mean, what's great about the show? Well, lots of things. The main event, Steve Austin versus The Rock for the WWF title. Now, disregard the ending because I didn't like that part. I mean, we don't need to debate that right now. We've debated Austin's heel turn over and over again over the years. It was a bad idea. But the match itself was amazing. Told an awesome story. Just had so much awesome action. It just felt like... I would say this is the second biggest WrestleMania match of all time. Just behind Hogan versus Andre. Not quite as big as that match, but just a shade behind it. But God, yeah. Awesome match. Two iconic superstars at the end of the Attitude Era. Amazing stuff. And I think what I appreciate about this show, every wrestling fan will like something on this show. If you like amazing technical wrestling, Chris Benoit versus Kurt Angle has you covered. That's a brilliant wrestling match. If Demolition Derby car crash stunts are your sort of thing, TLC 2. Hardy's, Dudley's, Edge and Christian just went out there, had a complete car crash stunt show. If good gritty brawls as well, Undertaker versus Triple H, that was a great match as well, a good gritty brawl. Now, Mike Kyoto being knocked out for 10 minutes because he got elbow dropped is a bit far-fetched, but yeah, that was a great match, and that one tends to get overlooked because of the two matches had at 27 and 28, but yeah, and do you remember the build of WrestleMania 27 where WWE ignored this match, happened 10 years before? But yeah, and then if you just want sports entertainment shenanigans, all these twists and turns, Vince and Shane street fight. So that's 5 really excellent matches on this show. But even the undercard is genuinely good. I mean, Test versus Eddie Guerrero is a nice little match. The hardcore title match between Kane, Big Show and Raven, that's an entertaining match. Jericho versus Regal is a good opener, not a great opener. Hell, even the gimmick battle royal is fun for what it is. I mean, objectively the match is pretty bad, but it was light-hearted fun and just to come down. So the only 2 real negatives I could say, China versus Ivory squash match. But even that sort of makes sense in the storyline, because why would China have a competitive match with Ivory at the time? And the only real one I could say is APA and Taz versus Right to Censor. That just did not feel like a WrestleMania match. That felt like a middle of the card Raw match, and it just didn't really work. But apart from that, this for me is the greatest WrestleMania of all time, and bloody hell, guys, I'm sorry I went so long with this. I wasn't planning to go this long, but there you go. That's all 41 WrestleMania shows ranked. So thanks for watching, and until next time, peace.